This breathing problem triggered the release of my consciousness. I left my body. I watched as my body fell to the ground. That was the start of this experience. My entire life replayed before me. Nothing was hidden. I could feel my mother's love, my father dealing with a crying baby. God asked me if I wanted to see his face. My attention was turned to a giant sun-like entity. It looked like a sun with billions and billions of little faces, and each face was like its own soul.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Awake with Lady. I am your host, Lady, and today we're joined by Aaron Green, who had a life changing near death experience at the age of 6, where he gained profound insights into pre birth memories, life's purpose, and the spiritual journey we're all on. Aaron, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me.
It's an honor having you on today, and I'm very excited to dive deep into your experience. Your experience is very unique, in my opinion, because it offers so many details. So I'm looking forward to our conversation. But before we go there, can you tell us a little bit about your life before your NDE?
Sure. So I was born in Durham, North Carolina in 1975. And when I was two, my parents moved to Chesapeake, Virginia, and we lived in a single family home in a suburban neighborhood. And I had lots of friends in the neighborhood, other kids my age, and an older brother. Back then, before video games and cell phones and computer games and all that kind of stuff, we would just roam the neighborhood all the time. And so that was pretty normal for us, is just to be outside, going back and forth to each other's houses and playing and that sort of thing. And my experience was shortly before my sixth birthday, as you said. It started when I was in a neighbor's backyard, just playing with my brother and some other friends, and that's when my experience happened.
So at this time, growing up, did you have any religious background that you are aware of?
Yeah, my parents went to a Catholic church, and
Hmm.
so I went to the Catholic church as well, and I had heard the basics that you could understand at 6 years old. I'd certainly heard of God and Jesus, but anything deeper than that, I didn't they didn't really get into it, or if they did, I didn't understand the deeper theology of the Catholic religion.
Yeah, I mean, especially at the age of 6, it's very hard for you to grasp those concepts. I was raised Catholic as well, so I
Okay.
definitely know where you're coming from. And from my personal experience, Aaron, I don't remember anything other than Jesus being born in Christmas. As far as I can remember, that's what Catholicism was all about. So I can definitely understand where you're coming from. But fast forward to that day where your experience happened. What was going on at the time? You mentioned that you were playing with some of your friends.
Right. We were in a neighbor's backyard, my brother and the friends and and we were playing. I don't remember what we were doing, but somehow uh, I had trouble breathing. No matter what I did, I couldn't get a breath of air in, and it was becoming increasingly worrisome. I was becoming agitated, and I didn't know what to do because I couldn't breathe. So I started trying to walk home, and I only got about 20 steps away. This breathing problem, it triggered the release of my consciousness, or my soul, whatever it is that I really am. Like, I left my body and I watched as my body fell to the ground, and that was the start of this experience that I had.
Okay, so why don't you walk us through what happened during your experience? What did you see? How was that for you?
Okay, sure. So initially, the first thing that came to me was, wow, I'm outside of my body. It was immediately obvious that me, who I am, what I really am, is so much more than just this physical body. That was just right off the bat obvious. And a couple things were readily apparent. One was that I could feel that the flow of time was different in that realm. It just wasn't the same as what we're used to here in this physical life. And a couple things that were, I think, are kind of interesting. It was like I was in a parallel realm that kind of looked like Earth. Like, like the houses were still there and there was grass, but it was a little bit different than the backyard of what my neighbors backyard looked like. The grass was kind of tall and weedy. We had a fence between our houses, and that fence didn't exist in this realm. And a couple things happened very quickly. One was my entire life replayed before me in like a fraction of a second kind of thing. And I re-experienced everything I had been through in those 6 years in extreme detail. Nothing was left out. Nothing was hidden. And the twist of it was that I could not only feel my feelings and re-experience all that, but I could also feel how I had impacted others. And the impact I had on my parents really stood out. The times I had cried and upset my father because he was dealing with a crying baby, or my mother's love, like that really stood out. Like I could literally feel it. And when my life replay was over, it felt like I had done nothing in life. Like 6 years was almost, it felt very small. Like I hadn't made any significant decisions or done anything major. And when that was over, I was kind of surprised, and I was just like, okay, I wasn't sure what to do. And I noticed in the distance, kind of like a pinprick of light, almost like a star, but I knew it wasn't a star. Like I knew there was something important about this light, but I didn't understand. I didn't remember. I like instinctively knew that this was very important, but I couldn't put it all together at that point. And so I didn't pay any more attention to it. I began like gradually floating around that area, just trying to understand what was going on. And as I was just trying to figure things out, I would start to have questions. My first question was, what am I? And it was like I could see myself almost like looking in a mirror. I existed as a round orb, a little bit like that orb behind you over your shoulder, but not as bright. There was kind of like a dim light that was coming out. But I mean, I was just like a little round orb of consciousness, but it was nice to exist like that. Like it was more comfortable than this physical existence. Like I was glad to be out of the body, even though I was only 6 years old and I had uh, a healthy body, no problems or anything. I was still, there was something about being free from the body that was nice. It was, um, I don't know, more pleasant, I guess. But I knew that I had existed like that many times before. Like this wasn't new. I instinctively remembered that I had been like this before. Anyway, so I had another question, and the other question was, where did I come from? And so when I had that question, it's like an event that I had previously been through. It replayed for me, and I re-experienced something that I experienced a long time ago. And this memory started. I had been a round orb of light with thousands of other orbs of light. We were all together in a very happy, comfortable, protected setting. I would call it like a sea of light because it was very bright there, and we were all together, and um, we were happy. There was no problems, and there never could be any problems. It was everything was perfect, but we were like ignorant. We didn't know anything. We didn't have any experiences, any background. We were comfortable, but we weren't like wise or smart or anything. And periodically, a gift would come down, and each one of us would get one gift, and we were all happy to receive it. As a kid, I thought of it like getting a cookie. Um, One time, there was one fewer gifts than there were souls in this group, and I made the conscious decision, okay, all these other souls that are with me, they want the same gift just like I do. So I'm just going to let them have it, and I'll go without so that all of them can enjoy the gift. And right when the last soul received the last gift, I was very gently lifted up out of this group. And the care with which I was lifted is really noticeable. I was very carefully lifted out of this group, and a higher level consciousness contacted me, like mind to mind telepathic communication. And it was communicated that it was my creator, that this being or entity had created me, and that I was very much loved and cherished, and that what I had done by giving up something that I wanted to help those around me, that was very important. And that indicated that I was ready to begin some kind of process or journey or move to the next step kind of thing. And basically, so this higher level entity, which I'll just call God for simplicity, God said basically that there was a fantastic existence ahead for me and for all these other souls. And that in order for us to really appreciate and enjoy our existence, we needed to go through a very brief but difficult learning experience so that we would be prepared to fully enjoy enjoy our existence. And basically, the way it was told to me was that God explained that he's loving, kind, compassionate, honest, um, all these positive traits, and that we were created with free will. And for us to enjoy our existence, we needed to freely choose to be loving, kind, compassionate, those exact same traits that God embodies. And that we were going to go through this education where we would choose for ourselves those same traits. We would learn the benefit of them, and we would learn that it's not good to engage in behaviors out opposite of those loving ways. And that through this experience, we would become educated or wise or whatever you want to call it, and then we would be prepared where we could really enjoy our existence, and then we wouldn't ever have to go through anything difficult again. It's like we were going to get all of our really difficult stuff out of the way quickly, and then we could enjoy our existence. I was like, okay, that sounds good, but can't you just change me? Like, why do I need to go through this difficult experience? Couldn't you just change me and make me how I need to be so that I can enjoy my existence? Like, why do I need to go through this difficult process? I had a question kind of like that, and God basically said, absolutely, God was powerful enough to change me or anybody else in any way that God wanted to. He was fully able to do that. Um, but we were created with free will, and free will was critically important to the entire reason for our existence to begin with. So that God wasn't going to violate our free will or force us to change. It was kind of like we needed to freely choose these things. I was like, okay, that I guess that makes sense. And then God asked me if I wanted to see his face. And I said, okay, I guess that sounds good. And so my attention was gently turned. I had been looking at all these other souls that I had been with, and my attention was turned to a giant sun-like entity. And there was millions and millions and millions of souls that were kind of like all together with this entity. It looked like a sun with billions and billions of little faces, and each face was like its own soul. And some of these souls, they kind of like came to the surface, and they stopped doing whatever it was they were doing, and they were there to welcome me into existence and basically to wish me well on my journey. They explained that they had been through an experience just like what I was going to go through, and when I was done with my experience, I'd be able to join them, and I could have all the enjoyment that they had. And it's important that I point out that they were way happier than that initial group I was with. Like, their happiness was off the charts. I couldn't even describe it. Um, but they were glad that I was coming into existence because I was going to be able to add something that no other soul could replicate. Like, every soul was individual and priceless, and I would be able to add something that would increase everyone else's enjoyment just a little bit. And so I was like, okay, that all sounds good. And then God asked me, are you sure you're ready to go on this education or this trip? And I agreed. And like that, I was very quickly moving away. I was leaving this place, and I was going to like a different realm. And it seemed like I was going really far and really fast. And we started looking at all these different places I could go. There was a whole bunch of different planets that were all kind of similar. They were all, I would be like a soul inside a physical body, kind of like what we are here on Earth. I don't remember any of the details about what any of the beings might have looked like on these realms, but I do remember that there was a lot. There was a whole bunch that we looked at. And in that realm or whatever, like, we could process information very quickly. And so we could very quickly look at thousands of different planets, and that was no problem at all. But when we saw Earth, there's something about this place that I really liked. I was positive this is where I wanted to go. And God asked me, are you sure? And when I said, yes, I'm sure, then the decision was made. I was committed. I was going to be coming to Earth. And with that, that memory ended because it answered my question. And so I was back to floating around my yard, and I was still trying to piece together what was going on. And so I had more questions. And as I would have more questions, the answers would come to me in the form of re experiencing something I'd already been through before. And so my next question was, oh, okay, why am I Aaron Green? Why am I living this life as this person? Like, how did I get here? And so I re experienced this memory. Essentially, it started out as I was a soul, and I was kind of like a confused soul, or like I was a little bit unhappy, filled with angst. Like something had gone wrong. Like I had screwed up. That's basically what it comes down to. And I was with some guides, and these guides, they appeared to me as like old men with beards and white hair. And I take it that that was just an appearance for my benefit, but they were there to help me. And essentially, they were trying to get me to come back to Earth. And initially, I was like, no, I don't want to go back to Earth. So the first part of what I shared earlier, like I was a new soul, I had never been through anything. But now at this point, it was clear that I had been to Earth many times. This wasn't my first life. And it felt like I had messed up my most recent life. But the guides basically they told me that I would be stuck in this realm unless I went back to Earth. Like I needed to go back to Earth to get myself straightened out, to correct some of the mistakes I had made, and that after I had done that, then I would be able to move on to a much happier form of existence. But how I was in that situation, I was kind of like stuck. But I was like, oh, fine, I'll just stay stuck. I don't want to go back to Earth. But they were trying to help me. That's what they were trying to do. They weren't trying to trick me or fool me or anything like that. They were trying to help me. And they pointed out that this is not how you're supposed to be. You could have a lot more happiness if you go back to Earth and get yourself straightened out. And they asked me, can we show you someone that you would help if you went back to Earth? And I said, well, okay, I guess so. And so they showed me some souls that I would be able to help if I went back to Earth. And so when they showed me that, I was willing to maybe consider it. I was like, okay, maybe we could talk about what the options are, what my life might look like. And first, they showed me a person I could become. And this was kind of an angry person. And I think they had a difficult childhood, and they grew up to be an angry person. And so the life of this person would be dominated by trying to not give in to their anger, to just live a normal life without being angry or violent or anything like that. And I completely rejected it. I was like, I don't want to live that life. That's not what I want to do. And they respected my decision. They were very respectful of my wants and needs and my decisions. And they said, okay, they totally understood. And so we looked at some other possibilities. And so we looked at some parents that were going to conceive a baby, and we started looking at what kind of options were available to these parents. And I really wanted to be a girl. I thought I would be less likely to be violent or hurt anybody if I was female. And we started looking at the options to these parents. And I wanted to be a redheaded child, a redheaded girl, because I saw that the parents had those genes available to them that I could pick a red haired girl. Um, so we started looking at what kind of options were available, and it became obvious that there weren't a whole lot of redheaded options available for these parents. And the options that were available, they didn't really work with my personality. And essentially, I would have been kind of an awkward, I would have been kind of a loner. I would have been socially awkward. I would have had trouble dealing with other people, and I never would have gotten married. And so that was a deal breaker to me. That was, you know, having just a normal life was more important to me than the hair color. And so we started looking at some other options, and it seemed like the girl options just weren't quite right with me and these parents. So instead, we started looking at the boy options, and those started to seem like a better fit. There was very few red haired options for boys for these parents. And so we started looking at brown haired options, and there was all kinds of options available. Like I could pick kind of anything I wanted if it was a brown haired boy, because that was the dominant genes to these parents. And we started looking at the possibilities. And so initially, I wanted to be really, really good looking, like the best looking guy on the planet. And these parents had those genes available to them. And I was like, okay, that's what I want. But my guides were like, well, hang on a second. Basically, the way it works was if I was extremely good looking, women would treat me differently. There would be options available to me. There would be temptations that I wouldn't be able to resist. And I would have been a much more promiscuous person. And that was very clear looking at what my life would be like with these guides and where I was with my spiritual development. And at where I was with my spiritual development, being extremely promiscuous was a downside for me. It would prevent me from moving to higher realms when I returned to the spiritual realms. And it was obvious that there was downsides. So my guides and we decided, okay, well, we're going to back the attractiveness down to something a little bit attractive, but nothing major, nothing great. I know it, I'm almost 50 years old. I know I'm not that good looking, but when I was younger, my looks matched what I remember picking with the guides. And then we started looking at intelligence. And it was the same kind of thing. I wanted to be like the smartest guy on the planet. And my guides, that, and that was available to these parents being really incredibly intelligent. And the guides pointed out, well, hang on a second. There's some downsides to being extremely intelligent for you. You would end up being an atheist. You would look down on other people because they're not as smart as you. You would end up being kind of a loner. You would have trouble relating to other people because of the intelligence mismatch. And so we did the same thing where we backed it down to where I was intelligent, but nothing extraordinary. And when we found the right level of intelligence, I was like, okay, that looks good. That's what I want to be. So we looked at all the physical aspects of this body down to the most intimate detail. And it was safe to say I knew exactly what I was getting myself into. And when we had picked all the physical attributes, my guides pointed out a couple unintended consequences. That they pointed out that I would have really bad acne as a teenager. That was kind of like a unintended side effect of all these genes I was picking. And I knew that I would have really bad acne for a couple years. Like in the school I went to, there was, I don't know, maybe 500 kids, and I had the worst acne in the whole school, that kind of thing. But it was also self evident that having that bad acne and going through that would actually help me to become a more empathetic, caring person, less focused on physical looks, and that it would be very brief, just a couple years. And what really stands out now, looking back on that, is that these 2 years or 3 years of difficulty with having really bad acne, from the spiritual perspective, it looked like nothing. Like 2 years was so brief, it was so tiny, it was almost negligible. But anyway, so I agreed to that. And my guides also pointed out the genes are available that I could have a club foot. And so we took a look at what my life would look like. And basically, there was no benefit to me or to anyone else for me having a club foot. Like somehow it didn't add anything to my journey. It would just be more difficult. And so we passed on that. So once we had the physical body worked out, then my guides started wanting, they wanted to plan out some more details. They wanted to plan out different aspects of my life. And they would show me things I had done in a previous life and how that would affect this upcoming life. And the best example that's really clear is they showed me in a previous life, I had been kind of a bigger guy and I had beaten up this other guy pretty badly. But basically, he didn't deserve me to treat him the way I did. I had beat him up. And at the time, I felt proud about it. Like I'm big and strong. But looking at it with my guides, it was very different. It was a bad thing. Like I shouldn't have done that. There's no reason for me to beat up this guy. And as a learning experience, my guides were then going to turn the tables, and I was going to receive what I had given out. But there was it looked like what I had given out was worse than what I was going to be receiving. There was some grace there, but they wanted my agreement that I would have my nose broken as a teenager, and basically all the events in my life would be just tweaked and pushed just a little bit so that that would play out. But they needed my agreement for that to happen. But it was obvious that this event that I had done in a previous life, it was kind of like holding me back in the spiritual realms. It was preventing me from moving up, and I needed this education or this experience to liberate me from this past behavior I had done. So I agreed to it. And there was a number of other things they showed me. They showed me things I had done in a previous life and how that would affect my upcoming life. And it was clear that I had made some mistakes. I had done some stuff I'm not proud of in previous lives. If you look at how people acted 500 years ago or in the dark ages, I did all the wrong stuff too that other people at the time were doing. I made all kinds of mistakes. And I saw that some of those mistakes that I had made were now going to play out in my current life. But it wasn't all bad. I'd also done some good things and helped people at different times. And that was going to affect my current life also. But all these different things I'd done in past lives were very much playing a role in what my upcoming life would look like, both good and bad. And then they showed me some specific people that I would interact with in life. And there was relationships that there was parts of it that were planned out where either I was going to help them or they were going to help me. And I saw that there was all sorts of little arrangements and big arrangements, all sorts of stuff. And there was a lot of people that I was going to help and a lot of people that were going to help me. And it was all woven together perfectly by these guides and by God so that all these lives, we each play a role in each other's life, but the net effect is we're all slowly moving up in our spiritual development. And so they showed me a lot of that. And, I saw that some people or souls, they had agreements that spanned multiple lifetimes. And some agreements were much smaller. There was all kinds of different agreements, but they needed up my agreement for all these different agreements that I was going to be a part of. And so I agreed to all kinds of stuff. And there was a couple things that I didn't agree to. And my guides were very respectful that if I didn't want to go through some experience, they would alter the plan so that I didn't go through it. But I would also miss out on the benefit that I would have gotten from going through that experience. Anyway, when they had it all mapped out, we kind of like stepped back and took an overall look at this life with all the different decisions and the planning that had been done. They said, "Are you sure you're willing to go through this?" And I said, "Yes, I'm sure." And with that second agreement, it was like the decision was made, and then I was off to start this life. And with that, the question was answered, and I was back to floating around next to my body. And then I had the further question: what happens to souls after they go through life? Like, how does that work? And so I was shown a number of realms I had been in between past lives. And the first one that stands out was a really terrible realm. I would call it a hellish realm. It was just awful. I was I looked like a monster. Instead of arms, I had like claws, and everyone else around me looked the exact same. And all we would do was just fight with each other. There was no remembrance of the past. There was no hope for a better future. There was no food or anything to drink. We just fought. That's all we knew. That's all we did. We just fought with each other. And no matter how bad we would hurt each other, those wounds would quickly heal and we would just keep fighting. But eventually, I got tired of the fighting and I didn't want to fight anymore. So I stopped fighting with all these other monsters that were with me. And as soon as I stopped fighting, there was beings of light or angels or whatever they were kind of above watching this whole situation. And as soon as I quit fighting, one of them swooped down and pulled me up out of this melee and basically it explained the situation. He said, "When you no longer wanted to fight, you don't belong here anymore." And I was kind of confused. And basically, he told me that all of these different souls that were down here fighting, they would eventually leave. Nobody was going to be stuck there forever. But to get myself straightened out, I would need to go off with some other guides who would help transition me to another life on Earth. And then I saw another realm I had been in between lives. I had been in a dark place with other souls, and this was kind of an unhappy realm, but it wasn't miserable. We were just kind of all standing around and we were kind of lost and confused. And we were in darkness and we didn't understand what was going on. But there were some beings of light, some higher level souls that were from happy realms. They were down with us. They were trying to help us and they needed our agreement to go with them, but they had a way to help us. And eventually, a soul or this being of light came to me, and I agreed to go with him. And they were very happy, and they helped me transition to another life that would help me get myself straightened out. And I saw another realm that looked very similar to Earth. It was a place I had been in between lives, and I must have lived in kind of like a medieval town prior to this life. And all the souls there were doing the same kind of stuff they had done on Earth, but they were much, much happier. And the buildings were much prettier. Everything, it was kind of like Earth, but a perfect version of it. And somehow I was able to recognize that this was kind of like a midway realm. And so I didn't stay there very long at all. I quickly wanted to transition to happier realms. So I left that place very quickly so I could continue this spiritual journey and continue to move upwards. And I saw another realm that I had been in, which was like a city of light. It was extremely beautiful. The beings there, I couldn't even describe their happiness. They were very happy, and everyone was like a translucent light, like you could see through them. And it was really beautiful, and everyone was just filled with joy. And with that, it's kind of like my question had been answered. So I was back to floating around my neighbor's yard. And I remembered that when I'm done with this life, I get to go to one of these much happier realms. And I was so thrilled. I was ecstatic. I was ready to go. But as soon as I had that memory, this being of light came at me very quickly and essentially said, "You are not to leave your body." It was like I had bent the rules, or I had done something I wasn't supposed to do. Like my breathing problem should not have triggered my soul to leave my body. That's my interpretation of what he said. But as soon as he said that, it's like, bam, I was back in my body, and I didn't have a breathing problem anymore. I stood up. At this point, my brother had come to check on me because I guess from his perspective, I'd just been laying there on the ground for maybe 30 seconds or something. And I immediately went home. I tried to explain this to my mom, but I just couldn't explain it. There was no way I could explain that at 6 years old. It's hard enough now, but at 6 years old, would have been impossible. And I would think about this experience every day, try to figure out what I'd seen, what it all meant. And after maybe 6 months, I was contacted mind to mind communication by one of these guides. And it was kind of like a fingerprint. Like I knew exactly who it was. It was one of the guides that worked with me to plan out this life. And essentially, he told me that a couple things. One is the experience that I had was interfering with my ability to live a normal life because I had seen all this stuff about God. And I knew that God is real. I knew that we were all spiritual beings. Because of that knowledge, I could never obtain faith. Faith is very important and valuable from a spiritual perspective, but I could never obtain it because I had knowledge of God, and it prevented me from having faith. And the other thing they showed me was that they needed to change my life plan. They needed to make some changes to it based on this experience, and my life was going to be a little bit harder, but it would prepare me to be able to handle some of the stuff I had seen during my experience. So I agreed to what they wanted, and I didn't think about this experience anymore until I think I was about 35, and I was reading a Newsweek article about Dr. Eben Alexander. He was a neurosurgeon who had a near death experience, and he wrote a book about it. So I was reading this article, and something clicked, and I remembered my experience. Like it all came back to me. And as an adult, I could understand a lot of it better than I could as a kid. But I spent the last 14 years, 15 years, something like that, trying to make sense of what I saw and to understand it and to just share it with other people when I can.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us. It's definitely an incredible story. A lot of details there that many of us, myself included, wonder like what happens before and after we die. Like
Right.
what are we? Especially growing up in the Catholic religion or maybe other organized religions as well. In my case, I was taught that you started to exist when you were born. And then
Right.
when you die, you either go, if you were good, if you're lucky, you go to heaven, but if not, you go to hell.
Right.
So these things were not making sense to me as a young child. So, and I always wondered all these details that you gave me. I always wonder, like, what, but why? But why? So, thank you for sharing your experience with us.
Of course.
Now, Aaron, I am a little curious. At the beginning of your experience, you mentioned that you were having trouble breathing.
Right.
Did you ever find out what caused you to have trouble breathing?
No, I don't really understand what happened. I don't remember all of the details clearly about what was going on before this happened. I never had asthma or anything like that, and I never had that kind of significant breathing problem after that. It was kind of a one-time situation that I don't understand, but at the time, no matter what I did, I just couldn't breathe. That's all I really remember about it, and I don't know any further details.
That's interesting to me because I believe that part of our life planning, we also choose certain exit points
Right,
to where we have the choice of maybe having a similar experience and then choosing to stay in back in heaven,
right.
for lack of better terms, or coming back. So it makes me think that maybe this near death experience was planned, but you maybe didn't remember. What is your take on that?
All right, yeah, so my take on it
Mhm.
is my guides, when I was planning this life, they didn't know that this experience was gonna happen, and I didn't know this experience was gonna happen. But I think maybe at higher levels, like maybe at God's level, he knew that this was gonna happen, but it felt like I had bent the rules. Um, I don't remember planning out that exit point, so I'm not really sure. I feel I guess what I'd say is my guides didn't know about it, but God, I think God knew about it. That's as near as I can figure it out.
Now, going back to your guides, you mentioned that you were planning your life according to the spiritual development that that your soul was for this lifetime. You remember coming in to balance certain karma, both good karma and maybe not so good karma. So, like for
Right.
instance, the experience where you beat up the other guy. I remember talking to another guest a while back, and she was telling me that she remembers choosing her life and planning everything, and she remembers that she came to balance the karma with another soul. And then the soul that came into this life to help balance that out was the same soul. So, in other words, do you think that the soul that came with you to balance out that fight was the same soul that you beat up, or maybe a different one?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question.
Hmm.
Um, Personally, I think that it doesn't have to be the same soul. Like God can balance thousands or millions of different lives all together without it necessarily being a one-to-one matchup between the souls.
Hmm.
I think some of the people I'm dealing with in life are souls that I had known in previous lives, and I might be balancing out that karma directly, but I don't think it has to be the same soul all the time. I think we could balance it out. There could be like 1,000 souls in a ring, and somehow
Hmm.
God has it all balanced out, so everyone's doing what they're supposed to do. Um, so I think it goes both ways.
That's an interesting perspective. Maybe like whatever soul is at the same vibration as you at that time, that could be
Right.
a deciding factor there. That just came to me, but there's no scientific, studies in that. That's just me.
Right. There's no way for us to really answer that question, but
Exactly. Absolutely. Now, after 6 months, you were made to forget
right.
because
Well,
that was
they asked for my permission to forget, and I
okay.
agreed to it.
All right. Evidently because they explained to you how things would change and how you wouldn't
Yeah,
have faith. You forgot. You continued your life as a 5, 6, 7, 8 year old. You grew up, went to
right.
school. You had your life. And during this time, you had no memory whatsoever of your
That's right.
experience.
Yeah,
Now,
no knowledge at all.
so you had no knowledge at all, but did you have any curiosity about the spiritual realm and how things worked before and after we lived the planet Earth?
Yeah, so I grew up a Catholic, like I said. I went to
Mhm,
Catholic church, and I read the Bible and went to Bible study, or whenever they call it confirmation in the
mhm,
Catholic church. And so I had a pretty good understanding of the Christian Bible and the Catholic view of things. And some of that I didn't agree with at the time. It didn't feel right to me, but some of it did feel right to me. And I was like, I think most people are. I basically accepted what I was being taught, but I always had some questions. I always felt like, well, I don't really know. I guess I was pretty normal, I think. I basically believed in God, and I felt that there was some significance to Jesus and the Bible, but I didn't really feel like I had it all figured out. I didn't feel like I knew. Um, and then somehow reading this article about even Alexander and his experience, I feel like I accepted what he was saying, and I had faith at a higher level. Like my level of belief when I read that, it I guess passed some threshold or whatever,
mhm.
and it allowed me to get all my memories back.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. At the age of 35, all those memories, like the floodgates opened up
Right.
and everything came all at once back to you. How did that challenge your belief systems, your religious background?
Well, it became clear to me that what I had been taught wasn't a perfect teaching. Like
Mhm,
there's some views of the Catholic Church that don't line up with my experience, and a lot of that is stuff that I always kind of had questions about.
mhm,
Um, I think what became clear to me after having this experience is that what's really important is love, kindness, compassion, honesty, acts of service, how we treat each other. Like that is really important, and that really stood out. And to me, that matches the teachings of Jesus that I remember. It's the same
mhm,
kind of stuff he was telling other people. Love your neighbor, be humble, don't lie. The parable of the Good Samaritan. Like I feel like what I experienced matched what Jesus said. To me, it fits together very nicely. But some of the other stuff that I view as human creations of religion, like I don't view that as important anymore. I
mhm,
don't think I ever really did. But there's a lot of stuff that I think were created by people. they don't really line up with what's really important, which is just how we treat each other, being good to each other.
Yeah, that's true. So it sounds to me like you were able to see the teachings from a different lens.
Yeah, I felt like, before I remembered my experience, I would say, well, I don't really know. I don't
Mhm,
have my opinions, but I don't feel like I know. But now it's like I feel like, okay, I have a pretty solid
mhm,
reason, in my viewpoint anyway. Other people certainly might disagree, but I feel like based on my experience, I have a pretty solid foundation for what I'm saying, which is we got to love each other. We got to be good to each other. That's really important. And it's now the basis from which I approach my spiritual life and
mhm.
just my normal life. And I think there's so many other people who are saying the same things, that they had an experience similar to mine. And I feel like pretty much all of them are saying how we treat each other, loving your neighbor, that kind of stuff is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that too. I haven't had a near death experience. I'm not looking for one, so I'm okay.
Right.
But yeah, I agree with that 100%. Now, when you remembered your experience and you were able to process it, how long did it take you to tell your family about this
Right.
experience?
I think it took me about 6 months before I started trying to tell people.
Mhm.
And that's very difficult, especially at first, because it's just so outside of our normal everyday life, sharing this experience, that it's really hard for people to accept it. I told a number of people in my life, and I got everything ranging from people who are very interested in what I was saying to people who maybe thought I was crazy, and then all kinds of stuff in the middle. And so I guess I've gotten to where if somebody doesn't want to hear about my experience, I'm not going to try to tell them. But if someone does want to know what I experienced, what I saw, then I'll try to share with those people. And so it's been actually kind of difficult trying to share this experience,
Mm.
because it's a little bit hard to talk about. But I feel like it's like people could benefit from understanding a little better about how this works, and just, hey, be good to others, and it's really that simple. I feel like it's important enough for me to share that message, that I'm willing to push through the difficulty of sharing this experience and try to talk about it.
Many people coming back, many other people that have had near death experiences, when they come back completely changed. They're a different person, they act different, they have different abilities that maybe they didn't have before. Their
Right.
family and friends, they notice the different like a substantial difference in the person. You had your experience when you were 6 years old, and it
Right.
was wiped clean from your memory. At
Right.
35, you remembered it and you started processing it. It took you 6 months to tell your family and friends. How has this remembering this experience changed you from who you were before remembering your experience?
Right. I think I go out of my way more to help other people. I think I'm more kinder to others. I try to avoid like being a troll on the internet, that kind of thing. I try to avoid all of
Mhm.
that kind of activity. I try to be positive and help other people and be good to others. Um, and I think people in my life have noticed that, and noticed that I'm maybe a little nicer than I used to be. Not that I was such a horrible person. I don't think, maybe other people would disagree, but I think that's primarily how this has come out for me. Is I'm just trying to if I'm able to help someone, I try to actually help them, and that's how it's affected me.
Aaron, I like to ask people who have had near death experiences and spiritual awakenings and other experiences, mystical experiences,
Right.
for advices to people in your shoes. So I always like to go back to a particular person that I met at an IN's meeting a
Okay.
couple of months ago. She was there with us. She was part of the audience, and then the guest was telling her experience over Zoom. So once they finished sharing their experience with us, then we got to ask questions similar to what you and I are doing right now.
Okay.
This person, I remember she was wearing a cast. I think it was on her left arm, if I remember correctly. But you could see the despair in her eyes, the confusion and pain in her soul through her eyes. She wanted to ask this person a question, the guest. She said, I had a near death experience recently. My life has been turned upside down. Everything is falling apart. I don't know what to do. where do I go from here? What do I do now? I know that you had an experience when you were 6 and it was taken away from you until 35. But what advice would you give someone in that particular situation?
Yeah, I fully recognize life can be very difficult at times. I've been fortunate that my experience didn't have any life altering kind of physical difficulties associated with. But for someone who is going through those kind of difficulties, I guess I would point out that there's a spiritual benefit to these difficulties that we're going through. There's a silver lining to these dark clouds, and hardships and these frustrations that we all go through. They're temporary, and eventually we're going to get through them, and we're going to be able to move up to a much happier realm of existence. And so, I guess I would try to point out that, hey, I know it's very hard. I know what this person is going through is difficult, but if you recognize that there's a benefit to you for going through this, and that you're going to get through this, you're eventually going to move on to something better, that maybe that can make it a little bit easier to go through these hardships.
Beautiful. Thank you. Now, on the same token, if you had a friend that was trying to support and help a family member that had a near death experience, what advice would you give them to help this transition, this adjustment period, be a little easier on that family member that had the experience?
Right. I would suggest just listen to what they have to say. They can say what they need to say, and you can believe it or not believe it. That's entirely up to you. The other is to recognize that there's millions and millions and millions of people who have had this kind of experience. Your loved one or your family member, they're not unique. Like, a lot of people have gone through this all over the world, all ages, all races, genders, all that stuff. It's actually, you know, I don't want to say common, but it's not rare for people to have this kind of experience. And that, if you could listen to what your loved one has to say, maybe you could learn something. Maybe it could help you with your spiritual progression, or to live a better life. Or at the very least, you love this person, just respect them that they had this experience, and uh, listen to as much as you're willing to. And if possible, maybe you could gain something. If not, that's okay. You don't have to accept or believe everything they said, but it's a real experience for them. And so I think just being respectful about it is helpful.
Yeah, and that's such a huge thing. Be present and just listen to them. That's all they need. I remember when I had my experience, not an NDE, it was just a Kundalini awakening
Okay.
back in 2012. I thought I was going crazy. And I felt like I didn't have anybody to talk with
Right.
regarding, about my experience or anything like that. And at that time, YouTube, social media was not what it is now. There's so much information to support both a family member and the experiencer through this. It's just, also take advantage of your resources is what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah. I'm very thankful for people like you who are allowing me a chance to share my experience. And I'm thankful that there's so many people out there that they're sharing their experience. There's a place that we can talk about them, and get the information out for anyone who's interested. I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, and I'm grateful that you were, so readily available to come on the show and spend time with us. I'm doing this because I believe that if we together, you and me, with our conversation today, we can help one person. If we can help one
Right.
person, I'm happy with that.
I completely agree with you. Yes.
Yeah, for sure. Now, we can go on and talking for hours. You had a fascinating experience. But just to switch gears here, I do want to ask you, do you have any current projects that you're working on that you would like for us to know about?
Sure. So I'm currently working on a book that I don't know when I'll be able to get it out, but eventually I should have a book out. My working title is Emerging from the Light. And then I have a YouTube channel that I'm just barely getting started called Emerging from the Light. And I share a link to some of my interviews, and people ask me questions sometimes. And so I've got a couple videos up there where I try to answer the questions that people have sent me. So if anybody's interested in that, you can check it out. If anybody wants to contact me directly, I'm easy to find on Facebook, Aaron Thomas Green, or you could email me at Aaron Green 1975 at gmail.com. And I'll try to respond back, or answer any questions if I'm able to.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'll make sure to link all your information in the
Okay.
descriptions. And also, when you release your book, let me know, and then we'll
Okay.
put the link on the description too, so that people can find it much easier.
Okay. I appreciate
Now,
that.
of course, of course. Now, we are about to wrap it up here, but before we go, if there was one thing, Aaron, that you would like for the audience to get from your near death experience, your life, in our conversation today, what would that be?
Yeah, I guess the main theme that I would want everyone to understand is we need to be good to each other. We need to love our neighbor through kindness, compassion, honesty, respect, self control, empathy, acts of service. And that if we can just do that, if we can just try to be good to other people and not hurt other people, we make we prepare a much better afterlife for ourselves, and will help other people in the process. If people could just do that, this whole journey would be so much easier for everybody.
Thank you for ending us on that note, Aaron. Thank you once again for coming on the show.
Thank you.